Alright, sorry notes. I'm going to be stealing your format again. This is just unedited, unscripted. I'm just, clearly I just came out of the shower. So, better, no better time to do something like this, right? Uh, so as I'm sure most of you know, news broke yesterday that famed drummer Neil Peart of the band Rush passed away at the age of 67 this past Tuesday. This video, I kind of just want to talk about, the impact Neil and his band have had on me as a musician and as a person. And, yeah, let's just get right into this. So, I'm a big Rush fan. Rush were pretty much my introduction to prog and to musicianship in general. I mean, before Rush, I did like music. I did listen to a lot of it. Mostly, I'm sure like a lot of you, a lot of my early introductions to music were through my parents. And of course, my dad had a decent tape collection, and of course he had a lot of stuff in it from Led Zeppelin, Boston, Cheap Trick, Kiss, all the basic, dad rock bands, right? And I remember going through it one day and seeing a copy of Rush's Signals and Permanent Waves. And, my dad said, "Oh yeah, Rush, like, they have the best drummer in the world." So, of course, me being probably like 11 or 12 years old at the time, uh, popped it into whatever little stereo I had at the time. Probably one of those like cheap little mini systems with the, two tape decks, a radio, CD player, and the two speakers on the side. And I don't actually have that exact cassette, but I do have another copy of Signals, as I would have had it as a kid. Like, this is how I would have seen it as a kid, the tape and liner notes with the lyrics for all the songs in it, and, all that stuff, all that lovely nonsense. This cassette case is a little wonky, but this is exactly how I had discovered Rush. And those are two non-standard albums to get into Rush through. Like, most people, of course, are gonna do it through like, you gotta listen to 2112 or you gotta listen to Moving Pictures. And for me, it was Permanent Waves and Signals instead. Although, of course, growing up in Canada, you're gonna hear Tom Sawyer and Limelight on the radio every 15 minutes. So, of course I was familiar with those tunes, but in terms of like full albums, it was all about Signals and Permanent Waves at the beginning. And I don't remember exactly how I reacted the first time I heard Rush, but I do remember really paying attention to those drums, and it blew my mind. To the point where, from that moment on, I pretty much knew I wanted to be Neil Peart one day. I wanted to be a drummer. And, most people who know me as a musician know me as a guitar player or a bass player. But I actually wanted to be a drummer before I ever became a guitar player. In fact, not only is the guitar not my first instrument, it's not even my second instrument, because I went from wanting to be a drummer and not having any real means to become a drummer to getting a keyboard for like my 12th or 13th birthday or something like that, or Christmas, or, my memory is fuzzy on that, but I got this little Casio SK5 keyboard. If you know anyone who's getting rid of one really cheap, let me know. But yeah, so guitar wasn't even really my first love. I went from drums to keyboard, then guitar. And, Rush was, of course, my muse for a lot of this. Like, of course, at the beginning, I wanted to be a drummer so I could play what Neil was playing all over albums like Signals and Permanent Waves. And then, because I got a keyboard, and of course Signals is full of synth, I was getting to work learning songs like Subdivisions on it. So, right from the get-go, like, Rush and Neil Peart in particular had a massive impact on me as a musician. Like, I can safely say it's because of Neil Peart that I am a musician. And specifically Neil Peart, because it was pointed out to me that, like, his drumming was that special, and even at the tender age of like 11 or 12, I could recognize that. Like, I could listen to a Rush song and go, this is leaps and bounds better for drums than anything else I've ever heard. And, that really kind of started me on a journey of discovering Rush and, getting into other bands and other prog groups. Like, I had no concept of what progressive rock was at the time. Some of, that came down to, like, the songs being kind of long. And I remember getting, like, my first CD player and getting some, like, Rush burned on CD, like A Farewell to Kings and stuff, and, having the novelty of watching the timer on the CD exceed 10 minutes. Like, to me, at, like, 12, 13 years old, that was like, amazing. It was funny more than anything. Like, I thought it was cool because, like, most songs on the radio were only like 3 minutes, but here's Rush, like, doing like 10-minute long epics. So, part of my next, bit of discovery with Rush, like, I knew I wanted to get more into them, but, I grew up in a very small town outside of Sudbury, and there just wasn't really a lot of, like, avenues to check out music. Like, if you didn't already have it in your collection, and, me being a kid at the time, I didn't really have, like, an income. I couldn't just, like, go into town, go to a record store, buy an album. My parents were members of, like, the Columbia House, or whatever it is, where, you buy one tape or CD at full price and get, like, 10 for a cent. And that's actually where I got my first piece of music I ever bought myself, was Boston's Greatest Hits on tape. But I actually came across these at a yard sale, and these are the originals that I had. It's Rush's Chronicles compilation. And these were essentially my scripture through the early days of high school. And I mean, it's a greatest hits compilation, but because of that, I mean, there's a little bit of everything from their early days, from, the first Rush album, Finding My Way, Working Man, Fly By Night, all the way up to, like, 2112, Farewell to Kings, La Villa Strangiato, Spirit of Radio, Red Barchetta. I'm surprised YYZ's not on this. Distant Early Warning, Red Sector A, Manhattan Project, Force 10, Time Stands Still, all the way up to Presto with Show Don't Tell. And, this was a really good way for me to sort of discover what Rush had to offer. And it kind of led to, like, my first taste of just, like, how great this band was. And eventually I ended up finding this at another yard sale, All the World's a Stage, and this tape is so old and so poorly maintained it doesn't play in any of my cassette players anymore. So yeah, I mean, there we go. That's, like, my discovery of Rush. But, at the same time, I was into Metallica as well. And I remember somebody telling me about a band that was a mix of both Rush and Metallica, and that was Dream Theater. And of course, one thing led to another. I started checking out Dream Theater. I got into them right around the same time they released 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, and it was just uphill from there. Like, everything I've listened to since then has had to, like, compare with, like, Rush, Metallica, and Dream Theater. And those have been, like, 3 bands that have shaped everything else as far as my musical tastes go. Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how, like, Neil Peart sort of single-handedly not just, like, got me into music, like, made me a musician, but, like, his technique on the drums, his sense of style, his timing. I mean, I didn't know what an odd time signature was at the time. I just knew that he would do this thing that was, like, really fast, and then he would, sometimes the beat would turn around in a bit of a wrong place. I didn't know that was a time signature until, I started like freaking out about these Rush songs, and like, okay, I'm going to pay attention in music class now. And I really enjoyed music class because of, learning all these secrets to how Rush composed and created their songs. So, you know, thanks, Neil. If it weren't for you, I'd be a doctor now, or maybe a rocket scientist instead of a musician. Who would know? Um, yeah. So, when I heard that Neil was gone, I felt a shadow cross my heart. A little bit of cheesy song quoting there because I'm awkwardly creating silences so that I can see in Audacity right now. But Rush were such an innovative band. I would actually go as far as to say that yes, they did invent progressive metal. I mean, we can talk about like, oh, who really did it? Was it Crimson Glory? Was it Queensryche? Was it Fate's Warning? Was it Dream Theater? No, it was Rush. Rush truly invented progressive metal, in my opinion. I think they were the first band that very knowingly mixed progressive rock and heavy metal. I mean, you look at their early influences, and it was the metal of the day. It was, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath. They had like the Sabbath-esque riffing. They had the Deep Purple sort of, vibe. The Led Zeppelinisms were almost Greta Van Fleet level in the early days with Rush. But then, they also had these influences from bands like Genesis and Yes and King Crimson. And, they were very vocal about mixing these ideas together. And when they started to do that on Caress of Steel, I mean, it wasn't the most successful thing. The Necromancer and Fountain of Limnath, I mean, I personally love those songs, but, they got a lot of hate for that. And when they finally broke through with 2112, I mean, that was it. The writing was on the wall. Like, progressive metal is now a thing. I very much consider 2112 to be the first real progressive metal song. Some aspects, maybe even the first power metal tune. And, if it weren't for them, like, the entire genre that I worship today wouldn't exist, or it wouldn't have taken the same form it has now. Like, yeah, Rush very easily, single-handedly invented an entire genre of music that, some people don't like it, some people think it's a little pretentious and heady, but it's made great musicians out of me and so many other people. Another really interesting thing about like Neil Peart's his influence on me is it's not just down to being a musician. I mean, his lyrics also had a very profound impact on me as well. There was always a certain depth to his lyrics, a bit of an emotional sort of vulnerability to them that, like, for an introvert like me growing up, his lyrics really sort of spoke more to someone like myself than, maybe to the average, like, pop listener of the day who was listening to, songs about putting your butt inside of a bigger butt. And, just Rush's lyrical sort of depth and the sort of understanding in a lot of the lyrics, sort of like reaching out to people, and, I think they were like one of the first bands that really sort of tackled issues like mental health, with songs like The Pass, with like teenage suicide being a major theme of the song. This is in the 80s, like when that kind of thing wasn't really talked about as much. Nobody's Hero sort of, touched on like LGBT issues and such. Acceptance of, gay people. That was something that in the early 90s, like, it was still kind of a taboo. Subdivisions, of course, was very much like a song that I could relate to, being a very introverted kid in high school. And, seeing the sort of cliquish kind of dealings in that time. And there were even songs that sort of got me into other fields, like Cygnus X1 and Countdown were both tremendously influential into me developing an interest in astronomy and science. And, those two tracks in particular, just still, like, to this day, they get me riled up about space science and stuff. And, the world's lost an incredibly profound person this past week. And, if it weren't for Rush, if it weren't for Neil Peart, my life would be very different today, definitely, for sure. There's just so much, like, passion in Rush's music, and so much, like, just all out, just technicality mixed with emotion. It really was like the perfect package. And I mean, and then when you start to get into the personalities of the rest of the band, like Alex Lifeson is a total lovable dork, and Geddy Lee is just such a nerd, and Neil Peart sitting behind the kit, intensely focused. It really is like the ideal band. And like when you know that like they were never about like the drugs or the women. There was no scandal about Rush. Like all three of these guys were just like tight like brothers. Well, I think that's going to conclude this video. I'm still in absolute shock about this. Like, Neil Peart did not seem like he was going to go, but I think the fact that he was dealing with brain cancer, and I've lost a few people to cancer in the last little while, so, I mean, I know how incredibly poignant and emotional this must be for Neil's family, for Geddy and Alex. So, I don't swear a lot in my videos, but fuck cancer. I don't really have a lot of money right now to give to any sort of cancer donation fund or anything like that, but I strongly suggest that if you do have the means, do it. Help save somebody's life. Anyway, I think that's it for this video. It's been running about 18 minutes. Thank you for watching, and Love Show out.